church.
Okay, we're going to talk about some of the church history and the development of Christology and the issues regarding the God man. The nature of Christ, the soteriological question. Jesus, the God man. It is quite evident in the scriptures that the followers of Jesus acknowledged him as Emmanuel, God with us. His followers held a firm belief that in him they had encountered Yahweh himself. The New Testament's reflection on this experience and its implications led to the judgment that Jesus is both God and Savior. 2 Peter 1, verse 1. So commonly was Jesus evaluated as Messiah or Christ, that Christ became almost a personal name. It was the assertion of the New Testament writers that Jesus of Nazareth is divine. The certain conviction of the New Testament writers regarding the divinity of Jesus met a different fate among both Jewish and Greek mentalities. Some people of Jewish heritage with a strict monotheistic background evolved in their thinking to maintain what has been called an adoptionist view. This view, held by the Ebionites, understood Jesus as a mere man who, by scrupulous observance of the law, was justified and thereby became the Messiah. On the other hand, Greek mentality, imbued with rationalism, cast the apparent divine-human paradox in metaphysical terms. For them, it was important to decide on the ontological identity of Jesus of Nazareth. These Greek concerns underlay the various docetic views. According to the docetic view, the divine Christ did not have an actual human body. It was only an appearance, a phantasm. Since if Christ died, then he was not God, and if he was God, then he did not die. The upshot of these Jewish and Greek objections was great heresies early in the history of Christian thought. We wish to briefly view four of the early heresies to make one significant observation. Accompanying the controversies were particular conceptions of salvation. I make this observation with the goal of exploring how these perennial controversies may inform the discussion within the Adventist faith community. The hypothesis underlying the approach I am taking here is that the Christological discussion in the Adventist community may be illuminated by paying closer attention to respective soteriological positions. The nature of Christ and the history of Christian thought. Have observed that the controversies over the nature of Christ were accompanied by particular views of salvation. Indeed, we may say that the soteriological implications of the various positions held on the nature of Christ fueled the Christological controversies. I will test this observation by reviewing the first four great controversies of Christian history. Before doing so, I should observe that the adoptionist and ascetic tendencies had already crystallized into two schools of thought: the Antiochian and Alexandrian Christologies, respectively. These two overarching Christological schools were at the heart of the Christological debates. The Antiochian school, originating in Antioch, Syria, appeared to have been influenced by the Jewish mentality, where the humanity of Jesus was overemphasized to the point of denying the divinity of Jesus. Alexandrian Christology, however, originating in Alexandria, a center of Greek learning, emphasize the deity of Jesus to the point of blurring the distinction between deity and humanity. First, the Arian controversy. The Arian controversy, sparked off by Arius, a popular presbyter in the Church of Alexandria, who died in 335 AD, centered on ideas expressed by him that seemed to reflect the sentiments of the Antiochian school of thought. Arius, committed to the philosophically influenced Greek idea that God is undifferentiated, argued that Jesus, the Son, or Logos, had to be a creature and therefore must have had a beginning. As he put it, and I quote, "What we say and think we both have thought and continue to teach, that the Son is not unbegotten, nor part of the unbegotten in any way, nor is he derived from any substance. And before he was begotten or created or appointed or established, he did not exist, for he was not unbegotten. We are persecuted because we say that the Son has a beginning, but God is without beginning." Arius' point of departure, then, is ontological, meaning that terms like the Son, capital S, should not be construed to define the essential nature of Jesus, the soteriological connection. Arius' main opponent, the church father Athanasius, revealed in his opposition that although Arius argued from an ontological perspective, the essence of the debate was soteriological. Athanasius argued that salvation can be brought to humankind only by one who is truly God. It is true that Athanasius' particular view of salvation, in which humanity is partaking of the nature of God, was at the core of his argument. Nevertheless, the centrality of the salvation question to the Christological debate is undeniable. We should remember that the Church rejected Arius' position at the First Ecumenical Council in AD 325 at Nicaea, ruling that Jesus was begotten of the Father and of the same substance as the Father. The Council therefore affirmed the deity of Jesus. Apollinarianism. The Nicene declaration of the deity of Jesus left unanswered, however, how his unity with the Father. Apollinarianism. The Nicene declaration of the deity of Jesus left unanswered how his unity with the Father would be sustained. Apollinarius was concerned to affirm the Nicene position and work out a solution that would preserve the integrity of Jesus, i.e., truly integrate the divine and human against the Antiochian school that tended to create two persons. Apollinarius worked out his solution on the basis of Platonic anthropology that understood the human person to consist of three substantial entities: body, soul, and spirit. His proposition was that in the incarnation, Jesus' body and soul were human in nature, whereas the Logos occupied his spirit. By the way, William Lane Craig, I believe, holds to what he calls a neo-Apollinarian position. You can look that up, but neo-Apollinarianism. I actually think the reason someone like William Lane Craig would take on a neo version of a quote-unquote heresy, which to me, this isn't even, I got accused of this being part of this issue, but these are dualist issues. I'll talk more about that in a minute, what the issues are, but let me keep reading. So what was the soteriological connection in regards to Apollinarius' view? While ontologically Apollinarius' solution seemed to resolve the question about Jesus' identity, as in the Arian controversy, the soteriological issue became the test for its acceptability. Besides its docetic tendency, the Apollinarian position was also criticized for not correctly reflecting the Christian position that Jesus is the bearer of salvation. The view was that what the Logos did not assume in the incarnation, in this case the spirit of man, the Logos could not redeem. The position was pointedly stated by Gregory of Nazianzus as follows. I'm not super familiar with that term, that place. If anyone has put his trust in him as a man without a human mind, he is himself devoid of mind and unworthy of salvation. For what he has not assumed, he has not healed. It is what is united to his deity that is saved. Apollinarius' position was rejected at the Second Ecumenical Council in AD 81 at Constantinople, affirming the Nicene position. Okay, now Nestorius, the Nestorius controversy. It should be remembered that underlying the Nicene position, which was consistently affirmed in the controversies, was the Alexandrian Christology, which, unlike the Antiochian, there's probably a different way to say that, I don't know, Christology, that tended to create two persons out of the, God becoming a man, right? Okay, because he's got to be human, but he's got to be God, but he's got to be one person. This is the issue. I'll talk more about that when I'm done reading. So let me start over. The Nestorius controversy, Nestorianism. It should be remembered that underlying the Nicene position, which was consistently affirmed in the controversies, was the Alexandrian Christology, which, unlike the Antiochian Christology, had tended to create two persons, tended to blur the distinction between the divine and human, between the divine and the human. Alexandrian Christology insisted on a true communication idiomatum of two natures, a doctrine Nestorius could not accept, since for him it fused the divine and human natures. Nestorius sought to correct the foregoing perception, hence his opposition to the title bearer of God as applied to Mary. For him, such a characterization did not emphasize enough the integrity of the two natures. Nestorius sought to maintain the integrity of natures by saying that the union between deity and humanity was a voluntary union. The union is voluntary in two senses. The union results from the free will of God. The will of the human nature agrees with the divine will. The soteriological connection. Nestorius' position was rejected at the Third Ecumenical Council meeting in Ephesus in AD 431 as dividing Jesus into two persons. Yet, the underlying soteriological dimension is significantly noted by Grenz. At the foundation of the Nestorian position lay another heresy, the anthropology developed by Pelagius. According to Augustine's theological antagonist, a human person is endowed at birth with sufficient grace to reinforce the human will in its battle against sin. Sin, in turn, is not a state of being, but lies entirely in human action. Because of this endowment, an individual could theoretically attain perfection. Nestorius saw this perfectible human substance revealed in Jesus. The man Jesus employed the natural endowment of grace without fail. This exercise of his good will affected the voluntary union between Jesus and the Logos. The Eutychian controversy. Eutyches, after whom the controversy is named, accused Nestorius of dividing Jesus into two natures. His own solution was to insist that Jesus possessed only one nature, hence monophysitism, a nature which, as it turns out, was neither divine nor human. Eutychianism was rejected at the Fourth Ecumenical Council held at Chalcedon in 451 AD, and the two natures of Jesus were affirmed without confusing, changing, dividing, or separating them. Again, Eutychianism was rejected at the Fourth Ecumenical Council held at Chalcedon in 451 AD, and the two natures, the human and divine natures of Jesus, were affirmed, although without confusing, changing, dividing, or separating them. Wow, that's amazing. I'm skeptical, but I accept it. The soteriological connection with the Eutychian controversy. What is important for the purpose of this discussion was the aftermath of Chalcedon with regard to salvation. The Monothelites, drawing from Chalcedon, concluded that Jesus had only one will, namely the will of the Logos. In other words, Jesus' obedience was a result of the moving force of the Logos. Here again, as in the Apollinarian controversy, the early church applied the soteriological test to reject the monothelite position, arguing that complete redemption demands a complete incarnation, including assumption of a human will. Conclusion. It is quite instructive to note that in these early controversies, the test of the orthodoxy of any position, ontologically, was decided in relation to its soteriological implications, namely its implications on salvation or for salvation. In other words, even though the controversies appeared to center on the being of Jesus, ultimately, the significant issue was how his being related to our salvation. How may this conclusion shed some light on the issue of the nature of Christ in current Adventist thinking? It is possible that ultimately the Christological debate is really an issue about views on salvation, possibly. It's posed as a question. So here, the nature of Christ in Adventist thought. The Christological discussion among Adventists has divided along the lines of whether in Jesus' humanity did he take on a fallen or an unfallen nature. As in the early controversies of the early church, the discussion on the nature of Christ appears to center on the being of Christ, which the opposing positions hope to establish on the basis of the exegesis of relevant texts. Unlike the earlier debates, however, the fallen and unfallen positions in Adventist thinking focus on the nature of Jesus' humanity without addressing explicitly the relationship between his deity and humanity. My discussion will therefore have that narrow focus. How can our understanding of salvation help us define the ontological questions? In the rest of this presentation, I wish to analyze the fallen and unfallen positions with respect to their underlying, explicit or implicit, soteriological and anthropology. In addition, I will seek to show how Ellen White's comments may shed light on this analysis. So before I continue, this is a scholar, Adventist scholar, Dr. Donker. I'm not going to try to pronounce his first name. He's clearly African, I think. All right, so let me give a little bit of synopsis if anybody cares about the Adventist view. In other words, I've done a video on this. The thing about the councils is that if you're a physicalist or you have a monist type of view, let's say, not necessarily, but that's if you're not a dualist, a trichotomist or dualist or whatever, then the issues that were plaguing, or let's say that they were working out in the early church, were like somebody who corrects somebody else, and then they realize, well, no, that's not quite right either, and then they pull it back. It's like, oh, that guy's a heretic, even though he defended against that heretic Arius, he went too far, and they pull it back, and they're trying to work this out, because here's the issue. If you believe a human being, a whole single human, consists of 2 or 3 parts, we'll go with 3, okay? Whether you're trichotomist or not. You have one whole person. You are one whole person consisting of, a spirit, soul, and body, or, a rational soul. So, Jesus, or the Son, let's say, the eternal Son, or the Son of God, the pre-existing Son, okay? Pre-incarnate Son of God, Jesus. If he is a person in and of himself, which he is, right? And he's a spiritual being, and called, the Logos of the Trinity. Well, then that spirit is a person. Okay? He takes on human nature, human flesh. He becomes one of us. And we have a rational soul, or a spirit, and a body. All 3 necessary to be a fully human, living human. Okay? So how do you not confuse the person of Jesus and with his divine nature and his humanity? Well, as we read, if the Logos is a person in and of itself, as a spirit, and you posit that, well, okay, Jesus just took on a human body and a human soul, whatever that would mean. Especially if God, the Logos, is a spirit and retains personhood in and of himself as a spirit, fully God, right? That means spirits are full human, full persons. At least the divine spirit is. So do we just say Jesus had the divine Logos took on a human body, a flesh suit, and then whatever you think a soul is seems unnecessary to me at this point. If we're gonna conflate terms with metaphysical beings and human beings, which people do, and scoff at my view. Well, Jesus as a spirit was a full person. This is my own thinking, by the way. So you can correct me if you think I say something stupid, and you're qualified to say I'm stupid. It seems to me that there is an issue there, because now you have to say, well, does he take on a human spirit too? Now there's the full person, the Logos, who attaches a human spirit in there too. Now you got two persons. Jesus was two persons. Which part died? Doesn't he have to be what we are to redeem what we are? These are the issues. So before you think my view is automatically disqualified, I got some questions for your view if you're a dualist or a trichotomist. I don't think you can get away without, blending the spirits of the divine with the human. Now it's neither divine nor human. Adding a human spirit to the divine spirit. Now you got two full persons, because surely the divine Logos was a person in and of himself before he took on the human constitution. So look, my point is just this. It's an issue for everybody, I think. Okay? I believe Jesus became a human. That human died and came back to life. And it was fully human, and he is fully God. He redeemed us as a human. So my view is actually just simplifies the matter, and I don't think dualism and trichotomism is an answer that has a good explanation. But that's just my opinion, and I have more to learn, so let's continue. Jesus' human nature, was it fallen? This is a controversy in many circles for many years, church history, and it continues to be in Adventist theology. There's split positions here. Did Jesus take on the fallen flesh of Adam, or did he have special flesh? Or like the pre-fall flesh of Adam? It doesn't matter. So I'll just tell you what my intuition is. I don't take a strong position on it. I think Jesus took on a fallen body through his mother and overcame temptation that we're exposed to, did so without failure, and redeemed that, and that was an accomplishment that is able to redeem mankind as our kinsman redeemer. That's my intuition. That's what I think seems right. I don't think, because I think if you think he has to have a non-fallen nature, you're basically saying we have something that makes us not guilty for sin, because we have to sin. And so I don't even know if I accept that I'm not necessarily fully against prevenient grace and total depravity, and necessarily I don't have a strong position on that, although I tend to probably say no, not total depravity. I don't think it totally makes sense. I think we're responsible for our sin, but we're utterly surrounded in a sinful world, which I don't know if my mic went out because I had the screen went black. So I'll check the comments in a moment here when I'm done. If anybody wants to join the conversation, I do have another stream going on in a few hours because I moved it from the nature of hell from normally Friday, last night to tonight. But to not drift from the conversation here. So I'm just giving you a picture of my view, although I hold it somewhat tentatively, but I have reasons why I think it makes sense at this point. But if anybody wants to show me the fatal heresy, I mean, I'm open to changing my mind here. So here, this is an example of, even within an Adventist denomination, there's the scholarship, and people have argued it from the very beginning. There's different views. So I don't have any particular reason other than it seems right to me that he took on human flesh as we have human flesh. There's no need to posit the Immaculate Conception so that Jesus can get pre-fallen flesh and all this stuff. I mean, I'm not saying you have to believe that to make the assertion that he didn't have fallen flesh. I know there are good arguments for both views, in my opinion. So let's continue. Jesus' human nature, fallen? Question mark. And this document will be in the description of the video if you'd like to review it yourself. It's from an Adventist perspective, discussing the different views here and the history. The fundamental argument for the fallen nature position is that Jesus somehow assumed fallen sinful flesh without being a sinner. This position is based on the premise that a person born with sinful flesh need not be a sinner. By sinful flesh is meant the human condition in all of its aspects is affected by the fall of Adam and Eve. The grand principle underlying the fallen position is that the witness of the New Testament writers suggests that Jesus had no physical, emotional, or moral advantages over his contemporaries. It seems fair to conclude, from the perspective of fallen nature advocates, that as far as Jesus' humanity is concerned, he was exactly like any human being after Adam and Eve. That is, post-fall. These fundamental convictions of the fallen nature position are ontological in nature. But what possible view of salvation does such ontology entail? I will explore these issues. The reason I am choosing to emphasize the soteriological rather than the ontological issue is that, in my view, the former is less intractable in the Bible. Two basic questions may be asked of the fallen nature position. First, is it biblically accurate to argue that sinful flesh cannot be equated with sin? Second, is it correct to say that Jesus in his humanity was exactly like us after the fall? Born with sinful flesh but not a sinner. Several scriptural passages are brought together in support of the idea that Jesus was born with sinful flesh. Jesus' virgin birth, his self-description as Son of Man, and Paul's Adam-Christ analogy in Romans 5 are used to support Jesus' solidarity with the human race. This solidarity, however, is interpreted ontologically. Hence, the notion of heredity looms large in these arguments. Thus, concerning the virgin birth, Gage notes, no biblical evidence suggests that the stream of humanity, no biblical evidence suggests that the stream of human heredity was broken between Mary and Jesus. Also, the second Adam is a hereditary descent born of woman. Similarly, key passages in Hebrews 2 are treated along the lines of ontological solidarity between Jesus and post-fall human beings. Thus, all from one in verse 11 means common human heredity. Flesh and blood in verse 14 means the same nature. And in its most immediate, obvious sense, verse 16 through 18 seems to say that Christ took the human nature common to all post-fall humanity. Let's read that real quick. I think that'll be good just to hear it for yourself, and then you can decide for yourself if you think that's true regarding this issue, if you're following along. I should have had it ready. Here we go. Maybe read it from the King James. Okay. Therefore, we ought to give the more earnest heed to the things which we have heard, lest at any time we should let them slip. For if the word spoken by angels was steadfast, and every transgression and disobedience received a just recompense of reward, how shall we escape if we neglect so great salvation, which at the first began to be spoken by the Lord, and was confirmed unto us by them that heard him? God also bearing them witness, both with signs and wonders, and with divers miracles and gifts of the Holy Ghost, according to his own will. For unto the angels hath he not put in subjection the world to come, wherefore we speak. But one in a certain place testified, saying, What is man, that thou art mindful of him? Or the Son of Man, that thou visiteth him? Obviously talking about Jesus. Thou madest him a little lower than the angels. Thou crownedest him with glory and honor, and didst set him over the works of thy hands. Thou hast put all things in subjection under his feet, for in that he put all in subjection under him. He left nothing that is not put under him. But now we see not yet all things put under him. But we see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels for the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, that he, by the grace of God, should taste death for every man. For it became him, for whom all are all things, and by whom are all things, in bringing many sons unto glory, to make the captain of their salvation perfect through suffering. For both he that sanctifieth and they who are sanctified are all of one, for which cause he is not ashamed to call them brethren, saying, I will declare thy name unto my brethren. In the midst of the church will I sing praise unto thee. And again I will put my trust in him. And again, behold, I am the children which God hath given me. Behold, I and the children which God hath given me. For as such then, as the children are partakers of flesh and blood, he also himself likewise took part of the same, that through death he might destroy him that had the power of death, that is, the devil, and deliver them who through fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage. Bondage of sin, by the way, not the law of God, as some outlandish people are out there teaching. For verily he took not on him the nature of angels, but he took on him the seed of Abraham. Are they fallen? I should think yes. Wherefore in all things it behooved him to be made like unto his brethren, that he might be a merciful and faithful high priest in things pertaining to God, to make reconciliation for the sins of the people. For in that he himself hath suffered, being tempted, he is able to succor them that are tempted. Okay, so there you have it. How human was Jesus? He was fully human. That's how fully. What, like his brethren, the sons of Abraham? Yes, post-fall. That's a big reason I would take this view. Back to the article. The next set of arguments in support of the view that Jesus was born with sinful flesh is a consideration of texts that specifically use the words sinful and flesh in relation to him, Jesus. First, it is argued from some of Paul's use of the word sarx, particularly in Romans 8:3, that although the word is morally neutral, it does provide the seat and material in which evil may operate. Sarx, then, in this view, is the fallen human condition which is given to all men and women at birth, although no one is held guilty or responsible for their condition. Gage notes Anders, I forget how to pronounce it, Nygren, approvingly. In reference to Romans 8, he observes, he shared all our conditions. He was under the same powers of destruction. Out of the flesh arose for him the same temptations as for us. In spite of the fact that Jesus had the same liabilities and disadvantages common to all mankind, he did not sin. Referring to Jesus, Gage writes, he had the power of choice and the heredity that weakens and misdirects it. He had a nature wherein temptations common to men and women could find appeal, but in Jesus, evil found no response. Jesus' victory over sin has implications for us. Gage interprets Hebrews 4:15 in the context of the great controversy to conclude that because Jesus did not sin, no man must sin. That is, since Jesus was made like his brethren in every respect and was tempted as we are, yet without sin, we too can live without sinning. Jesus' human nature, of course, without the power of God, that's impossible. Before you start humming and hawing and you don't think God has the ability to redeem his people in such a way that they stop sinning? Are you sure? I'm not talking about the expectation that we put on each other. We're talking about ontology here. Can human flesh be redeemed? The answer is yes. With God, all things are possible. Jesus' human nature, unfallen, The unfallen, okay, both these views are present in the Adventist church, so relax. Jesus' human nature unfallen. The unfallen nature position argues primarily from the nature of sin. So this is a sin nature issue. I like, how sin operates. Okay, if sin were simply a matter of acts, then, and by the way, I have soft spots for some of these arguments too, so that's why I say I don't hold my position I hold it tentatively. If sin were simply a matter of acts, then it would be possible to conceive of Jesus as born with sinful flesh and yet not a sinner. But from the perspective of the unfallen nature position, it simply isn't true that sin isn't present until the person's first act of sin. Men are born sinners. Therefore, Jesus cannot be born of sinful flesh. It should be remarked that unlike the fallen nature position that argues from ontology to soteriology, this view, the unfallen nature position, takes the opposite route of working from harmatology. I don't even know what that is. Harmatology. No. Someone can tell me what that is in the chat, maybe. Working from soteriology to ontology. Other way around, in other words. But is it biblically accurate to argue that sin is not consummated only in acts, acting out? Do you have to do sin? Do you have to do some sins to become a sinner? Or are you born a sinner? Can you be a skier without ever putting on a pair of skis? That's kind of the question. Skiers are such because they do skiing. Sinners are such because they commit sin. Or is that false? It should be remarked that unlike the fallen nature position, where Jesus took on the fallen flesh of man, whatever you think that means, they have a particular way of understanding that. This view argues the opposite way, that Jesus did not have fallen flesh, and they're arguing not from ontology to soteriology like we did at the beginning, but from soteriology to ontology. But is it biblically accurate to argue that sin is not consummated only in acts, acting, as in works? Is it biblically correct to say that Jesus was different ontologically from the rest of humanity at birth? Answering these two basic questions should enable us to flesh out the unfallen nature position. Let's put some flesh on this thing. Jesus was not born with sinful flesh because of the nature of sin. The unfallen nature position places great emphasis on the theological concept of original sin. From this perspective, all post-fall humans partake of original sin, which is defined first as a broken relationship between man and God, Romans 14:23, which then leads to the commission of wrongful acts, 1 John 3:4. Romans 5:12-21 is presented as a key passage in defense of original sin. Rand concludes from this passage that death or condemnation does not pass on to each person only because of his own sin. It does that too. But in a profound sense, death passes on to every man because of Adam's sin or broken relationship with God. The Adam sin affects all the race is mentioned 5 times. It's simply in verses 15-19 of Romans 5. It simply isn't true that sin isn't present until the person's first act of sin. Men are born sinners. Death reigned, verse 14, from Adam's sin. Babies die before knowingly sinning. Rand develops the case for original sin also on the basis of Psalms 51:5 and concludes that every human, save Christ, is born a sinner. Shall we read that passage? Psalms 51:5. First, Second Kings. Let's see. Whoops. Dang it. Okay. So this is the verse they're referring to. That is Psalms 51:5, which reads, "For unto the angels hath he not put in subjection the world to come whereof we speak." What, is that right? No, I didn't go there, sorry. I guess that is right. I guess that's what was quoted in the Hebrews passage, isn't it? Anyways, moving on. Before I confuse myself any more here. However, he distinguishes this biblical concept of original sin from the Roman Catholic concept, which imputes guilt to every human born on the basis that everyone was seminally present in Adam when he sinned. So yeah, so you can hold this. So don't think you can. This view demands that you have like an original guilt sort of view. It doesn't necessarily demand that you're taking that what he's calling a Catholic view here, right? Or some Calvinists have a similar type of view. This doesn't demand that view for these arguments to have teeth. It would seem that the unfallen nature position also builds on a principle of solidarity, though not ontologically, between Adam and the post-fall human race. Jesus' nature was unfallen because he was unique. The unfallen nature position defends Jesus' uniqueness, ontologically and otherwise, by a consideration of two Greek terms applied to Jesus, monogenes and prototokos. First, all the 9 uses of the term monogenes in the New Testament, monogenes, okay, monogenes, in the New Testament are examined to show that in its 5 applications to Jesus, which are John 1:14, verse 18, John 3:16, John 18:1, or John 18, and 1 John 4:9, it means unique and one of a kind. This uniqueness is interpreted Christologically to mean that his uniqueness consisted not only in how he was born, without a human father, but in what nature he was born, without human sin. Second, the uses of the word prototokos, which, with reference to Christ, Hebrews 1:6, Romans 8:29, Colossians 1:15 and 18, and Revelation 1:5, yield the same results of uniqueness with particular reference to mission. Jesus not in sinful flesh, but in the likeness of sinful flesh. As with the fallen nature position, the unfallen nature position examines Romans 8:3, but comes to the opposite conclusion. Rand shows that not only in Romans 8:3, but also in Philippians 2:7 and Hebrews 2:7, the use of the Greek homomia, or I don't know the word, sorry, homoio. Ryan, if you're watching, you can help me with this. I'm not a Greek scholar or a pretend scholar. Instead of isos, okay, so those words mean likeness, okay, the use of the term likeness. Instead of isos, or same, suggests that Jesus was only similar. He was like other humans and having a sin-affected physical human body, but not the same, because the word same isn't used there, they're arguing, as other humans. Like, but not the exact same, okay? He's human, but not fallen human, in other words, is what they would probably say. For he alone was sinless in his spiritual relationship with God, the Father. Assessing the 2 positions. The assessment of the 2 positions on the nature of Christ will be undertaken first by taking a second look at the foundational scriptural texts which serve as their respective points of departure, and second, by evaluating their views on salvation. Relevant spirit of prophecy passage, that's Ellen White's writings, will be employed in the assessment. This is an Adventist document, okay? So just, if you don't care, then ignore it, okay? But it matters to Adventists. The fallen nature position. In my overview of the fallen position, I drew attention to 2 main scriptural arguments, those relating to Jesus' ontological solidarity with us, and texts on flesh or sinful flesh. What can be said about the fallen position's interpretation of these texts? First, the Adam-Christ analogy. I think that's in Romans, right? Romans 5. Minimally, we can say that the ontological solidarity is perhaps not the best or only possible interpretation. F.F. Bruce, for example, understands the Hebrew concept of corporate personality to underlie Paul's argument in Romans 5:12-21. In other words, to Paul, Adam was more than a historical individual. Yes, he was the first man, but he was also humanity. Contrary to the fallen position's hereditary ontological solidarity, Bruce observes, It is not simply because Adam is the ancestor of mankind that all are said to have sinned in his sin. Otherwise, it might be argued that because Abraham believed God, all his descendants were necessarily involved in his belief. It is because Adam is mankind. William Barclay concurs with Bruce's interpretation. While he grants the plausibility of the interpretation that we inherit from Adam is the tendency to sin, an ontological idea, Barclay insists that this is not what Paul meant here. In Barclay's view, the passage ought to be given what he calls the realistic interpretation, namely that because of the solidarity of the human race, all mankind actually sinned in Adam. This idea was not strange to a Jew. It was the actual belief of the Jewish thinkers. Second, Hebrews 2:14 declares that Jesus partook of flesh and blood. While the text basically speaks of Jesus partaking in humanness, it does not by itself exhaustively characterize the humanness of Jesus. If we take Jesus' humanity as an exact ontological participation in all aspects of human life, as the fallen position does, then he must have undergone trials and faced temptations the way we all do. Talking about temptation, James writes, "But each one is tempted when, by his own evil desires, he is dragged away and enticed." James 1:14. On this point, Grenz notes that we know from the Gospels that Jesus was not pulled into sin in this manner. Then he draws the ontological implication. In this sense, we can affirm the position that Jesus was free from the taint of original sin, that is, from the propensity to sin all humans inherit from Adam. Jesus was not drawn into sin by an evil desire inherent within his humanness. Does Gren's conclusion run contrary to Hebrews 4:15 that Jesus was tempted in all points just as we are? Not necessarily. Hebrews 4:15 simply states that Jesus was tempted just as humans are tempted. Did Jesus have to have evil propensity in his human nature in order to be tempted as humans are? No. Adam was tempted humanly, yet he had no evil propensities when he was tempted. So, I mean, you asked the question about Adam, right, before the fall. Adam was tempted humanly, yet he had no evil propensities either when he was tempted. Third, what about Romans 8:3? Gage quotes approvingly and says that Jesus shared all our conditions. Ostensibly, this must include our propensity to sin, since out of the flesh arose for him the same temptation as for us. Here again, Bruce thinks this would be incorrect, in view of the fact that Paul clearly taught that Jesus knew no sin. 2 Corinthians 5:21. To say that Jesus came in sinful flesh, since in his view that might imply that there was sin in him. Hence, Paul intends the phrase "in the likeness of sinful flesh" to erase such an implication. He's being careful when speaking of Christ. In other words, to say the likeness of sinful flesh is to make sure he does. Paul, this is hypothetical, right? But perhaps Paul said it in such a way that is translated the likeness of sinful flesh, assuming that's reflecting the Greek appropriately, which I presume it is. The reason it's likeness of sinful flesh may be Paul being careful not to imply that Jesus knew sin in some sense, right? That's kind of the question at hand. What does it mean to sin or to know sin? Or, he's trying to, perhaps he's keeping Christ clean by being careful in his language, and we shouldn't overemphasize the likeness in any particular way, because that could be one of the reasons it's said the way it is. So it should be noted that the fallen position also believes that Jesus never sinned. Everyone agrees that Jesus didn't sin. Okay? That being the case, it seems that they are able to hold on to this belief and say that at the same time that Christ came with sinful flesh on the basis of their notion of sin. Sin seems to consist solely in action, since Jesus shared in all our conditions, including the inherent evil desire that draws into temptation and yet was not a sinner. I won't bother with the Ellen White, although I have Adventist, and I'm losing my voice is why. So if you're interested in the Ellen White, what she had to say in her writings that can contribute to this conversation, then please join me for part 2. Thank you. God bless. In 1 hour and 25 minutes, we will be doing the Nature of Hell show live. And yes, I just noticed that my starting shortly was remained up the whole time, unfortunately. Yeah. You might have noticed something. Adventists aren't Arian. So, again,
la 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 la